pathetic scale of their priorities, to lay bare the insignificance of the engagement for which they had sacrificed the honor of this historic first contact. You believe a record of your mission will suffice as an apology? Oren's voice was dangerously soft. I believe it will provide context, the Marine countered, his tone cleft. Nothing more. Very well. Oren granted a short, sharp nod. He would call the human's bluff. He would allow this final, pathetic display. He turned to Liren. First aid, open a secure channel. Accept the human's data package. He then raised his voice, a formal command that echoed in the silent chamber. And display the operational summary on the main screen. Let us all bear witness to the cause of this delay. The command landed hard. Akel flinched, his skin flickering with a chaotic grey pattern. Liren, ever the professional, simply inclined his head. As your command, Prelate. A low chime sounded as the data transfer was initiated and completed. The magnificent, serene starfield behind Oren wavered, then collapsed into a grid of stark, amber-colored, tactical data. The anthem of a chord seemed to falter, its ancient harmony disrupted by the raw, chaotic information now flooding the chamber. Columns of numbers scrolled at a blinding speed. A three-dimensional schematic of a battle space resolved in the center, filled with dozens of hostile contacts, their vectors traced in angry red lines. Energy expenditure graphs spiked into ruinous peaks. Oren watched with cold, detached interest, waiting for the designation that would confirm his suspicions. Pirate vessel, smuggler corvette, unregistered militia. He saw none. The hostile contacts were designated only as Threat Alpha. A new voice, sharp and laced with an unfamiliar tension, cut through the chamber's comms. It was the chief analyst from the ship's command center. Prelate, apologies for the intrusion. We are analyzing the energy signatures from the human's tactical log. The resonance profiles are anomalous. Oren did not turn. Explain the anomaly, analyst. The power output is chaotic, Prelate. It is not a recognizable drive signature. It is a cascade failure spectrum, but sustained, weaponized entropy. There is no theatrical model for a stable power source that functions on these primary principles. A frantic series of keystrokes could be heard in the background. I am cross-referencing the signature patterns across the deep archives. All known civilizations extant and extinct. No match. Expanding the search to mythological and pre-Accord records. Our long-range arrays recorded these signatures 6 weeks ago. They were logged as sensor interference, a cascade anomaly. Nothing in our detection architecture is calibrated to flag this as a vessel, the analyst continued. Suddenly, the analyst's breath hitched, a sharp, audible gasp. Prelate, he whispered, his professional calm utterly shattered. Confirming signature correlation. It cannot be. At the same moment, Akel rushed to Oren's side, his face a mess of flickering, panicked grey. He held out a data slate, his hand trembling. On its screen was a single passage of text, pulled from the most ancient, most restricted corner of the Corvinth archives. A text that was not a history. It was distilled from a living nightmare. Oren read the first line. The signal ceased at the third watch. No vessel returned. No debris was recovered. The system is considered consumed. Prelate, by the first Accord. The analyst's voice was a choked, terrified whisper over the comms. The energy signatures, the biomechanical residue in the human's material analysis, the swarm tactics, it is a perfect match. Threat designation, children of the void. The Children of the Void. It was a name from mythology. Not the mythology of heroes and origin tales, the mythology of endings, of worlds that had simply stopped sending signals, of the ancient accord records that noted, in the dry language of archivists, 17 colony systems falling silent across a span of 60 years, and then nothing. No further entries, because there had been no one left to make them. A force of nature from the chaotic dawn of the galaxy, self-replicating, consuming, incapable of negotiation, that devoured stars and left only dead. Silent systems in its wake, a threat that had supposedly destroyed itself in a cataclysm of its own making eons before the Corvinth had ever reached for the stars. Oren's mind reeled. His gaze shot from the terrified face of his aide to the tactical display. He saw the swarm of red icons, a tide of pure destruction. The human ship, so few of them, holding a desperate line. The casualty report scrolling in a sidebar, lists of names and ships declared lost. Then, slowly, like moving through deep water, he turned his head. His eyes, the solid black of a deep void, fell upon the human marine. The weary man had not moved. He stood, helmet under his arm, watching Oren with a steady, unreadable gaze. Oren's focus drifted down from the man's tired face to his armor, to the deep gouged channel in the helmet, to the scorched marks in the chest plate, and finally to the dark, non-reflected, flaking substance caked in every crevice. The biomechanical residue, the physical remains of the children of the void. He was not looking at the grime of a common battle. He was looking at the dust of a vanquished apocalypse. The stormy gray of offense drained from Oren's skin, leaving it a stark, bleached, terrified white. The grand diplomatic chamber fell beyond silence. The anthem of accord, that constant 3,000-year hum of Corvinth peace, had faded to an imperceptible whisper, nearly cowering before the data still scrolling across the main screen. The numbers were no longer tactical information. They were the scripture of an averted apocalypse. Oren felt as though the deck had fallen away beneath them. The chamber, the anthem, the 3,000 years of unbroken peace, all of it suddenly weightless. His gaze locked on the marine. His voice, when he finally found it, was a strained, fractured chord, a whisper that carried none of his formal authority. Children of the Void. He spoke the name as if it were a curse, a forbidden word that might summon the very horror it described. You fought them. The marine's expression was unreadable. The name clearly meant nothing to him. He glanced at the tactical display, his eyes scanning the chaos of his own battle. Don't know that name, Proet. We call him the Scourge. His gaze shifted to a stellar cartography overlay that had just appeared on the screen, a map showing the location of the engagement. His gauntleted finger caked with the dust of his enemy, lifted and pointed. This hive was attempting to breach the Viridian Traverse. Our orders were to contain it. So we did. The Viridian Traverse. The name hit Oren with the force of a physical impact. It was not some nameless remote frontier. The Viridian Traverse was the primary hyperspace lane into Corvinth territory. It was the great shining river of trade and travel that connected these people to the rest of the galaxy. It was their lifeline. The battle had not been fought in some distant, forgotten corner of space. It had been fought on his doorstep. The Scourge had not been a theoretical threat. It had been hours, perhaps days, from plunging his civilization into a war it had no memory of how to fight. These humans, these pragmatic, unprepared, honorless warriors, had met that threat. They had stood in the fire, and the fire had tempered them. They held that line. And then they had come here, not to a war council, not to demand tribute. They had come to a ceremony, on schedule. Contained it? Orin echoed the words, hollow. He looked at the casualty reports again, at the scrolling names of the dead. He saw the designation for a human capital ship, the UNSS Constellation, listed as total loss. All hands. A single vessel, likely carrying thousands of souls sacrificed to stop the tide. It was far from the only entry. The Marine's expression did not change. His tone remained flat, matter-of-fact, like reporting on a routine patrol. It was a tough one, he said. They adapt fast. We lost a cruiser, but the hive is sterilized. The traverse is secure. The understatement was more chilling than any boast could ever be. He finally lowered his arm, dismissing the entire monumental engagement as a finished piece of work. A problem solved. Orin felt his own worldview collapsing. He had been angry about dust on the floor while this man had been sweeping away the end of the world. He drew himself up, the movement slow and deliberate. His skin was no longer the white of terror, but a deep and somber grey, the colour of humbling realization. Major, he said, using a title he had inferred from the report. It felt inadequate, but it was all he had. The first contact protocols are fulfilled. He paused. A new dialogue must now begin. A dialogue between allies. The Marine nodded. We're ready when you are, Prelate. The return journey to the hangar bay was the inverse of the first. Orin himself escorted the 5 Marines walking beside the Major. Liren and Akel followed, their own skin a matching shade of somber grey. This time the honor guard was present. They flanked the corridor, but their posture was different. They were not standing in silent judgment. They were standing in silent, awe-struck vigil. As the Marines passed, each guard lowered his ceremonial staff in a slow, deep bow, a gesture of reverence so profound it had not been used in 1,000 years. The Marines did not seem to notice, or perhaps they simply did not understand its significance. They just kept walking, their heavy, pragmatic footfalls echoing in the now hallowed halls. They reached the hangar. The blocky, scarred dropship waited, its ramp still lowered like a waiting tongue. The Major and his Marines stopped before it, turning to face Orin. Orin looked at the Major. He saw the fresh, deep gouge across the man's helmet, and understood it was not a mark of carelessness, but a shield that had held, a price paid on his civilization's behalf. By a man who hadn't even known his behalf, he was paying it. He looked at the dark residue on the armor, the remains of the children of the void, and no longer saw it as a stain. He saw it as a badge of honor more profound than any polished regalia. Major Jenkins, Orin said, his voice a low, resonant chord, finally regaining some of its melodic complexity, but now imbued with a deep, humbling gravity. Your people honor us, not with ceremony, but with security. We did not have the framework to understand. The Marine looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, the weariness in his eyes was not tiredness. It was the weight of someone who had done this before, who would do it again and again. A flicker of something like sympathy. When it was gone, he turned, placed his helmet back on his head with a hiss of seals, and walked up the ramp without a backward glance. His 4 Marines followed, their movements economical and sure. The ramp began to rise, closing with a final, percussive thump. The engines whined, a sound devoid of melody, a pragmatic growl. The ship lifted from the deck, hovering for a moment in the brilliant white light of the bay, then slid out into the void. Orin stood alone in the hangar for a long time. His aides waited at a respectful distance, as they always did. The black dust mote still drifted across the deck. The ancient white floor, unmarked for 1,000 years of ceremony, was lightly stained with the residue of a battle that had been fought on his doorstep without his knowledge. Liren approached. "Shall I have the deck crew begin cleaning, Prelate?" "No," Oren stated. "Leave it." Oren looked at the footprints the Marines had left. Heavy, deliberate. The tread of armored boots that had been kicking down the gates of hell. Then came here next.
She thought she was the only Death Worlder until she met a human. If you enjoy this channel, please check to see if you're subscribed. The air on the council station was wrong. Too thin, too cold, carrying the antiseptic bite of recycled atmosphere, scrubbed clean of anything interesting. Yelena stood on the observation balcony overlooking the diplomatic floor, her claws retracted but aching to extend, her ears swiveling independently to track the whisper-soft conversations below. The gravity was 0.6 standard, barely enough to keep her boots on the ground, forcing her to move with deliberate, measured steps lest she launch herself into the vaulted ceiling like some undignified hatchling. She hated it here. Below, the delegates moved like schools of bioluminescent fish, clustering and dispersing in patterns dictated by political currents she found tedious. They were prey, every last one of them. Oh, they called themselves cooperative species or diplomatic specialists, but Yelena's golden eyes saw through the euphemisms. Herbivores, scavengers, filter feeders. Not a single apex among them, and they knew it. They knew what she was the moment she entered a room, the slight dilation of compound eyes, the involuntary flutter of gill slits, the universal language of prey recognizing predator. It made her lonely. "Ambassador Wylena?" A reedy voice pulled her attention downward. One of the council's administrative drones, a Metharian, all transparent membranes and visible organ clusters, clutched a data tablet like a shield. "Your candidates have arrived for the security interview." Security. As if this station needed protection from anything more threatening than a stern editorial. But the council had insisted, after the incident with the Centauri trade envoy. Not Yelena's fault, the fool had tried to poison her. Her immune system had metabolized the toxin before dessert was served, and she'd merely suggested politely that attempting to murder a Kalar diplomat was unwise. The envoy had required medical leave for stress-related disorders. Fragile. "Send them to conference room 7, Yelena said, her voice carrying the slight, sibilant hiss that made translators struggle. "I'll conduct the interviews personally." The Metharian bobbed in what might have been a bow and scurried away. Yelena descended from the balcony, taking the stairs rather than the lift, savoring the slight burn in her muscles even in the anemic gravity. The corridors were wide and softly lit, designed for comfort, for safety, for prey. Her reflection caught in the polished walls, a ghost of silver hair and predatory grace, out of place among the pastels and curves. Conference room 7 was exactly like every other conference room. Neutral, inoffensive, boring. Yelena settled into the reinforced chair, one of 3 in the entire station rated for her species, and reviewed the applicants on her tablet. The first candidate entered within moments. Korthak, species Grindel. The being had to turn sideways to fit through the door, its chitinous carapace gleaming like polished onyx, forearms ending in serrated pincers, compound eyes faceted like cut gemstones. Impressive. The Grindel were classified as aggressive omnivores with territorial tendencies, practically predatory by council standards. "Ambassador," the Grindel's voice resonated from somewhere deep in its thorax. "I am honored to be considered for this position. My species has served as security personnel on 17 council stations without incident." Yelena stood, flowing upward in one smooth motion, and walked around her desk. The Grindel tracked her movement, eyes shifting to follow. Good instincts. She approached until they were less than a meter apart, well within striking distance for either of them, and watched. The Grindel's carapace plates shifted, just slightly, a defensive posture. Yelena snapped her fingers next to its head, a sharp crack like breaking bone. The Grindel flinched. Just a centimeter, barely perceptible, but it flinched. "Thank you for your time," Yelena said, returning to her chair. "The council will contact you. But the interview is concluded." The Grindel left, carapace plates clattering in confusion or indignation. Yelena made a note on her tablet, prey behavior under pressure, disqualified. 3 more candidates followed. A Vexari with impressive credentials and a nervous system that flooded with stress pheromones the moment Yelena looked at it directly. a choral harmonist who spoke in beautiful tones about de-escalation and conflict resolution, completely missing the point. A heavily augmented Mekros who seemed promising until Yelena noticed the tremor in its servos when she circled behind it. Pray, pray, pray. She was contemplating whether to simply inform the council that no suitable candidates existed when the door opened one final time. The being who entered was small. Well, not small by council standards, but smaller than her. Perhaps 6'2" in human measurements, built broad through the shoulders but proportioned like someone designed for standard gravity at best. Soft skin tan, unarmored, distressingly vulnerable. Short, dark hair, square jaw, eyes that were almost black in the room's lighting. He wore a simple dark suit, well-tailored but unremarkable. He looked like maintenance personnel. "Stephen Halston," he said, his voice even and unresonant. "Applying for the security position." Yelena glanced at her tablet. Human. Terra, Sol system, recently admitted to council space. She knew almost nothing about them, another cooperative species from a standard gravity world, notable only for their recent and enthusiastic adoption of council protocols. They'd been so eager to join, so willing to adapt. Classic prey behavior. Mr. Halston. She let his name sit on her tongue, tasting the strange phonemes. "Your application lists military experience. Please elaborate." 10 years, Terran Expeditionary Force, Close Protection Specialist, Honorable Discharge. Combat experience? Yes. She waited for elaboration. None came. Interesting. Most candidates couldn't stop talking, trying to fill the silence, to appease. Yelena stood again, moving around the desk with deliberate predatory grace. Stephen's eyes tracked her, but the rest of him remained still, not frozen, simply economical. She approached until they were a hand's breadth apart. Close enough to smell him something clean and metallic, like scrubbed steel. Close enough to hear his heartbeat, steady and slow. Close enough to kill. Yelena let her lips pull back slightly, exposing her canines, a threat display that had sent hardened warriors scrambling. Stephen looked at her teeth with the clinical interest of someone examining a piece of equipment. "Do those require special maintenance?" he asked. Yelena blinked. "What? Your teeth. Do you need a particular dental plan?" "I noticed the council's standard health coverage is designed for omnivorous species. If you require specialized care, that should be negotiated in the compensation package." For the first time in 6 months, Yelena felt the urge to laugh. It came out as a low rumble in her chest that made the translator crackle. "You're hired. I haven't listed my qualifications." "You didn't flinch." Stephen considered this. "Should I have?" "Everyone else did." He nodded, as if this confirmed something. "When do I start?" "Immediately." Yelena returned to her desk, already feeling less isolated. "Follow me. I'll show you the quarters and brief you on protocols." As Stephen fell into step beside her, exactly 1 pace behind and to her left, the proper position for a guard without being told, Yelena caught herself analyzing his scent again. Steel and something else, something she couldn't quite identify. Not fear, certainly, not submission. She dismissed the thought. He was human. From a standard gravity world, soft-skinned and small-toothed. He'd be adequate for the position, and his amusing unflappability would be a pleasant change from the usual cowering. The fact that his heartbeat had never once elevated during their entire interaction was surely irrelevant. Stephen's routine was methodical. Yelena noticed this within the first rotation. While she prowled the diplomatic quarters in restless circuits, burning energy even in stillness, her predatory nature requiring movement, Stephen simply existed. He stood when standing was required, sat when sitting was efficient, moved only when movement served purpose. It was infuriating and fascinating in equal measure. "Don't you get bored?" she asked on the 3rd day, watching him maintain his position by her office door for the 6th consecutive hour. "No, Ambassador. You haven't moved." "I have. 3 times. Shifted weight twice, adjusted position once when the Centauri delegation passed." Yelena's ears flicked forward. She hadn't noticed. Why adjust for the Centauri? One of them kept touching his diplomatic sash. Nervous gesture, probably innocent, but his cortisol levels were elevated. I could smell it. Wanted a clearer line to you in case he decided nervousness required action. She turned fully to face him. "You can smell cortisol?" "Not the compound itself, the metabolic byproducts in sweat. Humans are persistence hunters, Ambassador. We tracked prey by scent across continents." The nose knows. He delivered this with such absolute deadpan that Yelena's translator actually paused, parsing for humor markers. "Your file said Terra was a standard gravity world." It is 0.98 council standard, and you're classified as a cooperative species. We are. Very cooperative. It's why we're so good at pack hunting. There was something in the way he said it, perfectly flat, that made Wilana's predatory instincts twitch. She dismissed it. Humans were new to council space, eager and compliant. This one had simply learned to mimic confidence. It was, she admitted, a useful trait in a bodyguard. The illusion of competence was almost as valuable as actual competence when dealing with the council's delicate sensibilities. The following week brought the first test of that competence. Ilana was reviewing diplomatic proposals in her private quarters, a space she'd had specially modified with higher gravity plates and reinforced walls, one of the few places on the station where she could move naturally when the crash came. A decorative sculpture, some priceless Vexian crystal thing the council had installed as a cultural gift, tore free from its wall mounting. 300 kilograms of razor-edged artistry plummeting toward her desk, toward her head, in the slow-motion horror of low gravity. Yelana's reflexes were apex predator sharp. She was already moving, already catching, claws extending instinctively to grip the crystal edges. She arrested its fall with room to spare, muscles barely straining, then gently set it on the floor. She turned, expecting to see Stephen in a defensive posture, perhaps drawing a weapon, showing some sign that his protective instincts had engaged. He was examining the wall mounting. "Impressive catch," he said absently, running fingers over the bracket. "But this corroded through. See?" He showed her the mounting, the metal eaten away by some chemical reaction, stress fractures radiating through the support. "This is an oxygen-reactive alloy. Someone's been using peroxide-based cleaning solutions near it. The station's maintenance protocols should have caught this." Yelana stared at him. "It nearly killed me." "It couldn't have. Your reaction time is 0.03 seconds based on the catch I just observed. The sculpture's falling velocity in this gravity gave you nearly 2 full seconds to respond. You were never in danger." He pulled out a small multi-tool and began removing the entire bracket assembly. "I'll file a maintenance report. This is a systemic issue. If they're using wrong cleaning solutions in diplomatic quarters, they're probably using them everywhere." He worked with practiced efficiency, removing corroded screws, examining each piece. Yelena realized she was watching the muscles in his forearms flex beneath his sleeves, the tendons standing out like cables as he worked. Denser than they should be, stronger than they looked. "You weren't concerned," she said. "I was concerned about the maintenance issue, not about me." Stephen paused, glanced at her. "Should I have been? I could have been injured." "Could you?" It wasn't a challenge, just a genuine question. "I've read the Kalar physiological profile. Your bone density is 3 times council standard. Your muscle fiber composition is designed for explosive power generation. That sculpture couldn't have broken your arm if it tried. Cuts maybe, but you have a clotting response that initiates in under 2 seconds. He returned to his work. "I assessed the threat as minimal." Yelana felt something unusual. She felt, analyzed. Not feared, not revered, but calculated. Like a variable in an equation. "Where did you read Kalar physiological profiles?" "Station library. I read the profiles for all council species the first day. Standard preparation. That's 217 species. 219. 2 more were admitted last month." He finished removing the bracket and stood, wiping corrosion residue on a cloth he produced from somewhere. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. Please don't catch any more falling objects. You'll encourage sloppy maintenance standards." He left. Actually left. Most guards would have called maintenance, would have stayed vigilantly by her side. Stephen just handled it and moved on. Yelana found herself testing him after that, though she told herself it was merely practical evaluation. She told him stories of her hunts on Kayla Prime, expecting the usual reactions: awe, fear, the delicious frisson of prey, hearing predator tales. Stephen listened politely, sometimes asking clarifying questions about atmospheric conditions or terrain features, treating her war stories with the same attentive courtesy he'd give a weather report. She described disemboweling a rift beast with her bare claws. He asked if rift beast hide might have commercial applications in armor manufacturing. She recounted her ceremonial duel with the Kalar High General, the blood, the glory, the razor-thin margin between victory and honorable death. He inquired about the medical response time and whether the station's facilities could handle similar injuries, just in case. It was infuriating. It was intriguing. And increasingly, Yelana found herself looking forward to his complete lack of appropriate response, The way he treated her not as a dangerous predator to be feared or a diplomatic asset to be managed, but as simply a person. One whose job happened to involve violence, like his own. "You're not impressed by anything, are you?" she asked finally, after recounting a hunt that had taken 3 days and crossed 2 mountain ranges. Stephen considered this. "I'm impressed by effective resource management. That hunt used approximately 4,000 calories per day, minimal equipment, and required navigating without technological aids. That's impressive efficiency. That's not what I meant." "I know." He met her eyes, his own dark and unreadable. "But it's what's true. I'm not here to be impressed, Ambassador. I'm here to keep you alive. So far, the biggest threat you've faced is poor maintenance standards. If something more serious emerges, I'll be impressed by how we handle it. Until then, it's just work." Just work. Yelena returned to her reports, trying to ignore the fact that for the first time since arriving on this station, she felt seen rather than feared. It was probably nothing. Humans were good at mimicry, at adapting. He was simply adapting to her, learning to manage a predator's ego. The fact that he smelled like steel and stone, like something solid rather than soft, was surely irrelevant. The fact that his resting heart rate was 52 beats per minute lower than hers, lower than almost any species she'd ever encountered, meant nothing. He was human, prey species, cooperative. She repeated this to herself and tried to believe it. The diplomatic gala was everything Yelena hated about council society condensed into one excruciating evening. The grand ballroom, if it could be called that, was a vast sphere of transparent aluminum suspended in the station's core, offering 360-degree views of the void beyond. 0.4 gravity made everything float and drift like a fever dream. Delegates in formal attire moved in slow-motion clouds, their conversations conducted in the hushed tones of people terrified of saying something offensive. Yelena wore traditional Kalar formal dress, a fitted bodysuit of midnight blue that left her arms bare, better to display the silver ceremonial bands around her biceps, the clan markings etched into her skin. Her hair was braided in a war crown, silver against silver. She'd extended her claws just slightly because formal occasions demanded formality, and on Kala Prime, claws were formal. The other delegates gave her a 5-meter buffer zone. "Try the appetizers," Stephen said from his position at her shoulder. He'd acquired formal attire from somewhere, a dark suit that fit him precisely, making him look almost dangerous if you ignored the fact that he was surrounded by beings twice his size. The Matherian caviar is actually pre-digested algae paste, but the presentation is impressive. "Are you seriously discussing catering?" "It's a gala, Ambassador. Catering is the point." He tracked the room with the same economical attention he brought to everything. "Although I note that Counselor Vex has been watching you for the past 7 minutes. Either he's interested in your dress, or you've become politically relevant." Yelena's ears swiveled, tracking the avian counselor across the ballroom. Vex was perched on one of the floating platforms, his species' hollow-boned frame making him appear almost skeletal. He was surrounded by his usual coterie of sycophants, but his crested head was turned toward her, black eyes unblinking. "Vex is always relevant," Yelena murmured. "He controls 3 voting blocks and has the Centauri trade delegations in his pocket. He's also been blocking our resource allocation for 2 cycles. Why? Because he can. The Kalar Imperium makes him nervous. We're too aggressive, too militaristic, too predatory?" He used the word destabilizing. Stephen made a considering sound. "That's interesting phrasing. Not wrong, necessarily, but interesting. It implies you're a known quantity being used incorrectly, rather than an inherent problem." Before Yelena could parse that, Vex was gliding toward them, his magnetic dress shoes keeping him anchored despite the minimal gravity. His entourage followed like remora fish trailing a shark. Except Vex wasn't the shark in this scenario, was he? The avian's smile was all beak and diplomacy. "Ambassador Yelena, how striking you look this evening." His voice had that harmonic quality common to avian species, each word carrying multiple tonal frequencies. "I trust you're enjoying the festivities?" "Counselor Vex." Yelena inclined her head precisely the minimum required. "The festivities are festive." "Indeed." Those black eyes flicked to Stephen, dismissed him as irrelevant, returned to Yelena. "I wanted to discuss your recent proposal regarding the mining rights in the Terminus Belt. I'm afraid there are concerns about environmental impact. The Terminus Belt is an asteroid field. There is no environment to impact." Nevertheless, Vex's crest feathers ruffled slightly. "Several member species have raised objections. The precedent of allowing military-adjacent species unrestricted resource access makes some delegates uncomfortable. There it was, military-adjacent. Not military because the Kalar Imperium had bent over backward to prove they were civilized, peaceful, cooperative, adjacent, like a disease you couldn't quite diagnose but knew was dangerous. Yelena felt her claws itch. The Kalar Imperium has operated within council guidelines for, "Oh, I don't doubt your compliance, Ambassador." Vex's smile widened, showing the serrated edge of his beak. But compliance and comfort are different matters. Perhaps we should discuss this more privately? I'd hate for any misunderstandings to occur in such a public venue. The threat was so delicate it took Yelena a moment to recognize it for what it was, misunderstandings. In a public venue, where witnesses might see a predator species lose control, where incidents could be manufactured, where her reputation could be demolished with a single misconstrued reaction. Every instinct in Yelena's body screamed danger. Not physical danger. Vex couldn't threaten her physically even if he tried. Political danger, the kind that ended careers and isolated species, the kind she couldn't fight with claws or speed. She looked to Stephen, expecting. What? Confusion? Concern? These were political waters far beyond a simple bodyguard's concern. Stephen was drinking sparkling water, looking bored. No, not bored. Yelena's predator vision was sharper than that. His eyes were tracking. Vex's entourage, the exit vectors, the positioning of other delegates. His body language read as bored, but his attention was a spotlight sweeping the room in calculated arcs. "I appreciate your concern, Counselor," Yelena said carefully. "Perhaps we could schedule a formal meeting to address these issues through proper channels? Perhaps." Vex's feathers settled. Although I should mention purely as friendly advice that several species are considering a vote to reassess military-adjacent classifications. It would be unfortunate if the Kalar Imperium found itself subject to additional restrictions. I would hate to see your people isolated. There it was again, that word, isolated. Vex knew. Somehow, he knew that isolation was the one thing Yelena feared more than death, the one weapon that would work against a predator who'd spent her life surrounded by prey. "I'll convey your concerns to my government," Yelena said, her voice flat. "Please do." Vex inclined his crested head. "Enjoy the evening, Ambassador, and do try the Metherian caviar. Stephen is quite right, the presentation is impressive." Vex glided away, his entourage flowing with him. Yelena stood very still, focusing on keeping her claws retracted, her breathing even. Political threats shouldn't affect her like this. She was a Kalar high diplomat. She'd survived assassination attempts, ritual combat, territorial disputes that left bodies stacked like cordwood. But this soft, insidious threat of isolation, of being pushed further into the margins of council space, this made her want to hunt. "He's bluffing," Stephen said quietly. Yelena blinked. "What?" "Councillor Vex, he's bluffing about the vote. His coalition doesn't have the numbers I counted heads while he was talking. He'd need 17 more delegates to force a classification review, and at least 8 of the species present would oppose it on principle." Stephen sipped his water. "He's testing you, seeing if social pressure works better than political maneuvering. How do you—" "I read the council voting records. 3 months of proceedings. Also, the species alliance maps, economic interdependencies, and historical voting patterns." He said it like it was nothing, like everyone spent their free time becoming an expert in galactic politics. "He's dangerous, but not because of the vote. He's dangerous because he's smart enough to know your weak points." The isolation threat was well crafted. Yelena stared at her bodyguard, this soft-skinned human who should have been overwhelmed by council politics, who should have been irrelevant in this arena. "Why did you learn council voting patterns?" Stephen met her eyes. "Because threats to you aren't always physical, Ambassador, and I'm here